The tea was still in my hair when he looked at me and said, "Clean it up." Not to her, to me. Like I was the one who had done something wrong. Like I was the spill. I have replayed that moment probably 500 times since then. The weight of the ceramic mug, the sound it made when it hit the side of my head. Not the mug itself, she was too calculated for that, but the stream of it. The scalding arc of Earl Grey that caught my left temple, my cheekbone, the collar of the cream-colored blouse I had ironed that morning specifically because I wanted to look put together. I wanted to make a good impression. I had been trying to make a good impression in that house for 3 years, and in about 4 seconds, everything I thought I understood about my marriage evaporated along with the steam rising off my shoulder. His name is Brandon Cole, and the woman who poured the tea was Kayla Merritt, his high school girlfriend, his first love, the girl whose name I had heard exactly once before that day, dropped casually into a sentence about people from back home, in a tone that was designed to make me feel like I was crazy for even registering it. I was not crazy, I was just early. The reckoning I deserved had simply not arrived yet. But let me go back, because the day the tea hit my face was not the beginning of anything. It was the end of a very long road that I had been walking down with my eyes half closed, telling myself the view was fine. Brandon and I met at a work happy hour in the fall of 2020. I know, a pandemic happy hour, which already tells you something about the kind of man he was. Confident, adaptable, willing to bend rules in ways that felt exciting at the time and would feel differently later. He was tall, dark-haired, with one of those faces that looks like it was designed in a committee specifically to make women lower their guard. He worked in logistics for a mid-sized distribution company, and I was a graphic designer at an agency 3 floors above his office in the same building downtown. We ran into each other in the elevator lobby about a dozen times before he finally asked for my number. Our first date was at a wine bar on 5th Street. He showed up 7 minutes late, apologized once, and somehow made the apology feel like a gift instead of an acknowledgement of fault. I noticed that. Filed it somewhere in the back of my brain and then ignored the file entirely for the next 3 years. My name is Melissa Hartley at the time. Now I go by Melissa Carr again, which is my maiden name, and I am not ashamed of that. I reclaimed it like you reclaim a sweater you left at someone's apartment, slightly stretched, smelling faintly of someone else's life, but still fundamentally yours. Brandon and I dated for about 18 months before he proposed. It was December, we were in Charleston visiting his parents for the holidays, and he did it on the beach at sunset, which sounds romantic and was, objectively, beautiful. His mother Linda took photos from about 30 feet away, which I thought was sweet at the time. Looking back, I think she wanted documentation. I think Linda always wanted documentation. We got married the following October. Small ceremony, about 60 people, at a vineyard in the hill country outside of Austin where I grew up. My best friend Danielle was my maid of honor. My younger sister Caitlin was a bridesmaid. Brandon's side included his brother Derek and 2 friends from college, whose names I could never keep straight. His parents sat in the front row. Linda cried. His father, Gerald, did not. For the first year of our marriage, everything felt genuinely, almost suspiciously good. We bought a house, a 3-bedroom craftsman in a suburb called Fairfield Hills, about 20 minutes north of downtown. 3,400 square feet, a finished basement, a backyard that backed up to a greenbelt. The mortgage was $2,840 a month, which was a stretch but manageable between our 2 incomes. We painted the kitchen a color called warm biscuit, which sounds ugly and is actually beautiful. I hung plants in the windows. Brandon built a raised garden bed in the backyard on a Saturday in April and planted tomatoes that mostly died, and we laughed about it. We had date nights. We had inside jokes. We had a cat named Pretzel who slept between us and whom Brandon pretended to be annoyed by while secretly letting her knead his chest every single morning. I saw him do it. He didn't know I was watching from the doorway, and the look on his face when he thought no one could see him was the version of Brandon I fell in love with. Soft, unguarded, real. I thought that version was the whole man. That was my mistake. The first time I noticed something shift was about 8 months before the tea incident. Brandon got a phone call one Tuesday evening while we were watching TV. He looked at the screen and something crossed his face. Not panic exactly, more like recalibration. The micro-expression of a person adjusting their story before they have to tell it. He said, "Give me a second." and took the call in the kitchen with the door mostly closed. He was in there for 11 minutes. I know because I was watching the clock on the cable box. Not because I was suspicious, but because the show we were watching had gone to commercial and then come back, and he still wasn't there. And I had that low-grade, nameless unease that I think most women in relationships are trained to dismiss as paranoia. When he came back, he sat down, picked up the remote, and said, "Sorry about that. Work stuff." "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, totally fine," he said. "Just a thing with the Chicago warehouse." I nodded. I let it go. I was very good at letting things go in those days. I had been practicing for years, first with my father, who was the kind of man who needed the air in the room arranged a certain way, and then with Brandon, who had a quieter but no less insistent version of the same requirement. I did not think about that phone call again until 4 months later, when I found a name saved in his contacts under KM with a Chicago area code. I was not snooping. His phone was on the counter, and he had asked me to check if his sister had texted back about Thanksgiving plans, and I saw the name because it was right there, because his recent calls were right there, and KM had called 3 times that week. I put the phone down. I went to the bathroom. I stood over the sink and looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment, and I told myself it was nothing. A work contact, a vendor. The world is full of people with initials. But something in my chest had shifted, like furniture moved an inch to the left in a room you know by heart. Nothing you can point to, just the wrongness of the space. 2 weeks after that, Brandon told me he needed to fly to Chicago for a logistics conference. 4 days, Thursday through Sunday. He had never been to a conference that ran through a weekend before. But when I mentioned that, he gave me the patient, slightly exasperated look he reserved for moments when he wanted me to feel unreasonable, and he said, "Melissa, it's not a big deal. It's just how the scheduling worked out this year." I didn't push. I packed him a travel bag with his favorite snacks and a note that said, "Miss you already," and I meant it, genuinely, because I still loved him. I still believed in the version of him I thought I knew. He came back on a Sunday evening and something was different. Not in a way I could name immediately. He was affectionate, maybe slightly more than usual, and he brought me a chocolate box from some boutique shop downtown Chicago, and he told me all about the sessions and the speakers and the dinner they had on Friday night at a rooftop place near the river. He had details. He always had details. But his eyes were somewhere else. Not all the time, just sometimes. In the pauses between sentences, he would go somewhere I couldn't follow. I told myself I was projecting. I told myself I was the problem. Then, 3 weeks later, he told me his company was transferring him to a regional director position, a promotion, more money, an extra $18,000 a year in base salary, plus a performance bonus structure. It was genuinely good news, and I was genuinely happy for him, and I hugged him in the kitchen and he spun me around and Pretzel meowed at us from the counter. What he told me next, almost as an afterthought, almost buried under the good news like something hidden in a gift box, was that the position was going to require more travel. A lot more. He'd be on the road 2 weeks out of every month, minimum, visiting distribution hubs across the Midwest, including, he mentioned, a hub just outside Chicago. I smiled. I said congratulations. I started mentally rearranging our schedule, our budget, our life. And somewhere in Chicago, I am now almost certain, Kayla Merritt was doing the exact same thing. The increased travel started in January. By February, I had learned to read the house differently, which silences were comfortable and which ones were loaded, which version of Brandon came home on Friday nights versus which one showed up on Sunday evenings after a long Midwest run. The Friday version was tired but present. The Sunday version was somewhere else entirely, wearing Brandon's face like a mask that didn't quite fit over whatever he was actually feeling underneath it. I tried to fill the empty weeks with work. My freelance client list had grown enough that I was seriously considering going independent full-time, and I threw myself into that possibility with the kind of focus that, looking back, was probably as much about distraction as it was about ambition. I redesigned a branding package for a small restaurant group in Austin. I pitched a new visual identity to a tech startup that had just closed a Series A. I worked late at the kitchen table with Pretzel curled on the chair beside me, and I told myself this was what building a life looked like. 2 people running parallel toward the same future. I told myself a lot of things in those months. The first real crack, Not a hairline fracture I could explain away, but a genuine split in the surface, came on a Thursday in late March. Brandon had been in Chicago for 4 days. He was due home that evening, and I had made his favorite dinner: braised short ribs with mashed potatoes, the recipe I'd spent 3 attempts perfecting because the first time I made it, he'd said it was the best thing he'd ever eaten, and I had held on to that compliment like a talisman. I had the table set. I had a bottle of red open and breathing on the counter. He texted at 6:43. "Flight delayed. Don't wait up." I waited up anyway. I am the kind of person who waits up. It is one of my least useful qualities. He got home at 11:15, smelling like airport and something else. Something I couldn't name and didn't let myself try to name. Something warm and faintly sweet that wasn't his deodorant or his usual cologne. He kissed me on the cheek, said he was exhausted, and went to bed. The short ribs sat on the stove in their Dutch oven, still technically warm, and I stood in the kitchen in my pajamas and looked at them for a long minute before I put them in the fridge. I didn't sleep well that night. I lay next to him in the dark and listened to his breathing, deep, even, untroubled. And I thought about the smell I couldn't name, and I thought about KM with her Chicago area code, and I thought about all the small things I had been filing away and not opening. The cabinet in my brain where I put the things I wasn't ready to look at was getting very, very full. The next morning I asked him about the delay, casually, over coffee. He told me there had been a weather system moving through, which was plausible. I nodded. I didn't push. I was still practicing my letting go. But that afternoon, while he was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter with a text notification. I wasn't trying to see it. I was standing right there refilling my water glass, and the screen lit up and I saw it, because it was right in front of me. Not a preview of the full message, just the sender name and the first line. The sender name was Kayla. The first line was, "Last night was exactly what I needed. Thank you for..." The screen went dark. I put my water glass down very carefully. I put it down the way you set something fragile on a surface when your hands are shaking and you're determined not to let them shake. I walked to the living room and sat on the couch and stared at the greenbelt through the back windows, and the trees were very green and very still, and I thought, there it is. There is the thing you already knew. When Brandon came downstairs, I was still sitting on the couch. He was freshly showered, in a clean t-shirt, and he had that relaxed, well-rested look that I now understood was not about coming home to me. It was about what he was carrying from somewhere else. "You okay?" he asked, because I must have looked like something was wrong. "Your phone got a text while you were in the shower," I said. My voice was very level. I was proud of how level it was. "From someone named Kayla." The pause that followed was only about 2 seconds long, but I have stretched those 2 seconds out in my memory until they feel like a full minute. I watched his face do something complicated, a rapid, almost invisible sequence of calculations, and then settle into something that looked like mild curiosity. "Oh," he said. "Yeah, Kayla Merritt. She's a logistics coordinator at the Chicago hub. I've mentioned her." He had not mentioned her. He had mentioned a logistics coordinator named David approximately 600 times. He had mentioned Kayla Merritt exactly 0 times before this moment. "I don't think you have," I said. "I'm pretty sure I have," he said, easy, light, the verbal equivalent of a shrug. "She's one of the team leads. We work together a lot when I'm up there." "She texted you on a Saturday afternoon," I said. "Hub runs 7 days," he said. "Melissa, is something wrong?" And there it was, the reframe. The gentle pivot from what I had seen to whether there was something wrong with me for reacting to it. I had seen him do this before, in smaller ways about smaller things. The technique had a name, I would learn it later, in a therapist's office. But in that moment I just felt the familiar pull of it, the way it made me want to back down and apologize for raising the subject at all. I almost did. I almost said, "No, nothing's wrong, sorry." I had the words ready. They were right there. Instead I said, "I saw the first line of the text, Brandon." Another pause, shorter this time. "Melissa," he said, his voice dropping into the patient, careful register of a man managing a situation. "She was probably talking about the presentation. We had a big presentation to the regional VP on Friday. It was stressful. She's expressive. That's how she talks." "Okay," I said. "Okay," he repeated. Okay, I said again, and I let it go, because I did not have enough yet and I knew it. I was not ready to blow up my life on a first line of a text message that could, technically, be explained away. I needed more. And some part of me, the part that had grown up managing a difficult father, the part that was very practiced at waiting, knew how to be patient. But I stopped sleeping well after that. Not dramatically, not all at once, just a gradual erosion of the deep, reliable sleep I'd had before, replaced by a lighter, more watchful kind of rest, where I was always just slightly below the surface, listening. April passed, then most of May. Brandon's travel schedule remained constant. 2 weeks home, 2 weeks away, like a tide. When he was home, he was mostly attentive, mostly present, and I watched him with new eyes that I tried very hard to keep looking like my old eyes. I did not check his phone again. I was afraid of what I would find, and I was afraid of what I would do with it if I found it. Then, on a Friday in late May, Brandon came home from a Chicago trip and told me his parents were coming to visit. His mother Linda, his father Gerald, and, he mentioned this last, with the careful casualness of someone who had rehearsed the sentence, Kayla's actually going to be in town that weekend too, so I thought it might be nice to have everyone over for dinner. You know, since she's such a big part of the team. I looked at him. He looked back at me with a face that offered nothing. You want to invite your coworker to a family dinner? I said. It's not a big deal, he said. She doesn't know many people in town and I thought it would be a nice gesture. She's great, Mel, you'll like her. I want you to understand what was happening here. He was not just inviting her into my house, he was testing me. He was staging something, the introduction, the normalization, the moment where Kayla Merritt became a fixture in our shared life, with my tacit blessing, because I had smiled and set an extra place at the table. I can see it so clearly now. In that moment, I could only feel the shape of it, angular, wrong, pressing against me from a direction I couldn't quite identify. Sure, I said. I'll make something nice. And I did. I spent 2 days planning a dinner for 6 people that I did not want to have in my house. I made a roast chicken with preserved lemon and herbs, roasted vegetables, a homemade focaccia that took 3 hours because I wanted everything to be so good that no one in that room could find a single thing to criticize. I set the table with the good dishes. I wore a cream-colored blouse, the same one I'd later ruin with tea, and I told myself I was going to be gracious and calm and completely fine. Kayla Merritt arrived 20 minutes before Linda and Gerald, which I would later understand was not an accident. She was pretty in the specific, deliberate way of a woman who knows exactly what she's doing with her appearance. Dark hair, wide-set eyes, a smile that spread across her face like she'd been waiting for the chance to use it. She brought a bottle of wine and handed it to Brandon with both hands, and when she saw me standing behind him in the doorway, something moved across her face so quickly I almost missed it. Almost. You must be Melissa, she said, extending her hand. Brandon talks about you all the time. Does he? I said, and I shook her hand, and I smiled, and I hated every second of it. She sat at my table. She ate my food. She laughed at Gerald's jokes and complimented Linda's earrings, and leaned in close to say something to Brandon that made him laugh in the unguarded, genuine way that I associated with the version of him I thought belonged to me. Linda watched the two of them with an expression I catalogued carefully. Not disapproval, not surprise. Familiarity. Linda looked at Kayla Merritt the way you look at someone you've known for a long time, someone you've been expecting. After dinner, while I was clearing plates in the kitchen, Linda followed me in. She picked up a dish towel and started drying without being asked, which should have felt helpful and instead felt like a setup. She's lovely, isn't she? Linda said. It was not a question. She seems nice, I said. Brandon and Kayla go way back, Linda said, drying a serving bowl with the careful attention of a woman who knew exactly what she was saying. High school sweethearts. Did he ever tell you that? I kept my hands moving. Soap, water, rinse. He mentioned she was someone from back home, I said. She moved to Chicago 2 years ago, Linda said. Right around the time Brandon got the Chicago accounts. She paused, let that sit. Funny how things work out. I turned off the faucet. I set a plate in the drying rack. I breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth, slow and even. Linda, I said, what are you telling me? She looked at me with those pale, careful eyes of hers and she said, I'm not telling you anything, sweetheart. I'm just making conversation. She set the dish towel on the counter and walked back out to the dining room, and I stood at the sink with wet hands and the absolute, bone-deep certainty that everyone in that house, Brandon, Linda, Gerald, and Kayla Merritt with her wide-set eyes and her borrowed wine, knew something that I was only now beginning to understand, and not one of them was going to tell me. That night, after Linda and Gerald drove back to their hotel and Kayla Merritt collected her coat and her smile and whatever else she had come to collect, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. Brandon cleaned up the dining room. He was good at that, at the physical tidying, at making surfaces look like nothing had happened on them. And then he came in and poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter and said, "See? That wasn't so bad." I looked at him. "No," I said. "It was fine." "She liked you," he said. "I could tell." I didn't say anything to that. I just started loading the dishwasher, and after a moment he kissed me on the back of the head and went upstairs. And I stood there with a roasting pan in my hands and thought about the way Linda had said, "Funny how things work out," and the way Kayla had handed Brandon that wine bottle with both hands, like it was a ritual they'd practiced, and the look on Gerald's face across the dinner table. Not warm, not cold, just watchful, the way a man watches something play out that he already knows the ending to. I thought about all of that, and then I finished the dishes, and I went to bed, and I lay in the dark next to my husband, and I was more alone than I had ever been in my entire life. The weeks after that dinner were the quietest and the most suffocating of my marriage. Brandon behaved well. That's the part that is hardest to explain to people who haven't lived it. How a person can be behaving well, can be present and attentive and doing all the right things, while you are slowly coming apart at the seams beside them. He brought home flowers once. He suggested we take a weekend trip to the coast. He sat on the couch with me on a Tuesday night and watched the show we'd been slowly working through and laughed at all the right moments. And I watched him laugh and thought, I don't know who you are. I don't know if I ever did. I started having trouble eating. Not dramatically, I wasn't skipping meals, I wasn't wasting away, nothing anyone would have noticed. But food stopped tasting like anything. I would sit down to eat and go through the motions, and afterward feel like I had consumed something with no nutritional value, no pleasure, no point. I lost about 7 pounds in 6 weeks without trying. My jeans were loose. I told myself it was stress, and it was, but the word stress felt too small and too ordinary for the thing that was happening inside me. I called Danielle on a Thursday in early June. Danielle, my best friend, my maid of honor, the person who had known me for 14 years and could tell from the way I said hello whether something was wrong. I sat in my car in the driveway. I had started doing that, sitting in the car before going inside, giving myself 5 minutes of space that was just mine, and I called her, and when she picked up and said, "Hey, Mel," I burst into tears. Not pretty tears, the ugly kind, the kind that makes sounds you don't expect to come out of your own body. "Okay," Danielle said, immediately, without preamble. "Talk to me. What's happening?" I told her everything. The phone call in the kitchen, the KM in his contacts, the Chicago trip and the smell I couldn't name, the text from Kayla that I'd seen for 4 seconds before the screen went dark, the dinner, Linda in the kitchen with her dish towel and her careful, devastating sentence about high school sweethearts. I told her all of it in a rush, and when I was done there was a brief silence and then Danielle said, very quietly, "Melissa, how long have you been carrying this by yourself?" "Since March," I said. "Maybe longer." "Why didn't you call me?" "Because saying it out loud makes it real," I said, "and I didn't want it to be real." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "It's already real, babe. It was real before you said it." I knew that. I had known that for a long time, but hearing someone else confirm it, someone who loved me, someone who had no stake in keeping me comfortable and ignorant, cracked something open that I had been trying very hard to keep sealed. "I don't know what to do," I said. "First," Danielle said, "you need to know for certain, not almost certain, not probably, certain, because if you're going to blow up your life, you need to do it with evidence in your hands. You need to do it in a way that he cannot talk his way out of." "He's very good at talking his way out of things," I said. "I know he is," she said. "That's why you need to be smarter than him about this. Don't confront him, not yet. Get your information first." That was the first time in months that I felt something other than dread and exhaustion. It was small, a tiny, hard seed of something that might eventually grow into resolve, but it was there. Danielle had a way of doing that, of turning the lights on in a room you'd been stumbling around in the dark. I stopped crying. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my jacket. I sat up straighter in the driver's seat. "Okay," I said. "Okay, tell me what you think I should do." We talked for another hour. By the time I went inside, I had a plan. Not a complete one, not a polished one, but the skeleton of one. I was going to document. I was going to pay attention in a new way, not the anxious, helpless paying attention I'd been doing for months, but the focused, purposeful kind. I was going to find out what I needed to find out, and then I was going to decide what to do with it. Brandon was in the living room when I came in, watching something on his laptop with headphones on. He looked up and smiled when he saw me, that easy, unconscious smile, and I smiled back and said I'd been on the phone with Danielle, and he nodded and went back to his screen. I went upstairs. I sat at my desk in the room we used as a home office, and I opened my laptop and I started a private, password-protected journal. The first entry was dated June 8th. It was 3 pages long. I wrote down every single thing I could remember, dates, times, the exact wording of things I'd seen and heard. The KM in his contacts, the Chicago trip with the smell I couldn't name, the text message, Linda's words in the kitchen, everything. I wrote it all down, and I saved it in a folder I named Design Archive 2022 because it sounded boring enough that no one would ever open it. Then I started doing something I never thought I would do in my marriage. I started paying attention to the credit card statements. Brandon and I had a joint account for household expenses and separate accounts for personal spending. I had always respected that separation, had considered it healthy, had felt no need to monitor what he spent on himself. I stopped feeling that way. I went back through 3 months of our shared account, and I started going through his personal account statements, which I had access to because we'd set up all our banking together, and the login information was in a shared document in our Google Drive that he'd apparently forgotten about. The charges were not dramatic. There was no single smoking gun item, no hotel charge with 2 names on it. But there was a pattern. Regular purchases at a restaurant in Chicago's River North neighborhood, sometimes twice in a week. A florist charge in early April that I knew nothing about. I had not received flowers in April. A boutique wine shop on the north side. Small amounts, individually explainable, collectively unmistakable. The architecture of a parallel life, built in increments small enough to seem like nothing. I wrote it all down. Dates, amounts, locations. I cross-referenced the restaurant charges with his travel schedule, which he kept on a shared Google Calendar because we'd agreed early in our marriage to be transparent about our whereabouts. Every restaurant charge aligned exactly with a Chicago trip. Every single one. It took me 3 evenings, working quietly at my desk while Brandon watched TV downstairs, to compile what I had. When I was done, I sat back in my chair and looked at the document on my screen and felt something I hadn't expected. Not devastation, not rage, but a strange, cold clarity. Like the moment when a fog lifts and you can see exactly where you are, exactly how far from shore you've drifted, and you understand finally that wishing you were somewhere else is not a navigation strategy. I texted Danielle a single word, confirmed. She called me immediately. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad enough," I said. "Months of it, maybe longer." "Okay," she said. "Melissa, listen to me. Do not touch any joint assets. Do not move money. Do not close accounts. Do not do anything financial right now. And I want you to call someone." "A therapist?" I said. "A divorce attorney," she said. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. Divorce attorney. I had not let myself say it, even in my own head. I had been circling the word for weeks the way you circle something hot, instinctively keeping distance, not ready to get close enough to feel the burn. "Danielle," I said. "I know," she said. "I know. But you need to know what your options are before he knows you know anything. You need information. You need to protect yourself. You have a house, you have joint finances, you have 3 years of a life built together. You need someone in your corner who understands how this works before any of that changes." She was right. She was completely, entirely right, and I knew it even as every part of me that had loved Brandon and believed in our life together was screaming at me to find another explanation, to give him one more chance, to ask him directly and trust whatever he said. I was done trusting whatever he said. I called a family law attorney the next morning. Her name was Rebecca Owens, and Danielle had found her. She had a reputation in our city for being extremely thorough and extremely discreet, which were the two qualities I needed most. I made an appointment for the following Tuesday. I did not tell Brandon. I told him I had a client meeting downtown, and I drove to a glass-fronted office building on Meridian Street, and I sat across from a woman in her mid-50s with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and I laid out everything I had documented. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she folded her hands on the desk and said, "You've done good work here. This is a solid foundation." "Foundation for what?" I asked. "For understanding your position," she said. "Texas is a community property state. Everything acquired during the marriage, the house, the joint accounts, the retirement contributions, is presumed to be marital property and subject to division. Your husband's income during the marriage, your income during the marriage, all of it goes into the calculation." I thought about the $2,840 monthly mortgage, the $18,000 raise he'd gotten when he took the regional director position, the 401k he'd been contributing to since before we met, which had grown substantially in the years we'd been together. I thought about the house, the craftsman with the greenbelt view, the kitchen we'd painted warm biscuit, the raised garden bed where the tomatoes had mostly died, and we'd laughed about it. "What do I do right now?" I asked. "While I'm still living there, while he doesn't know?" "You document everything," Rebecca said. "You continue exactly as you have been. Keep records, keep copies. Do not move assets. Do not make any large purchases. Do not do anything that could be characterized as waste or dissipation of marital property. And if he asks for anything, signatures, account changes, anything, you call me first." "He's bringing his whole family to visit in 3 weeks," I said. "His parents. And her. He's bringing her again." Rebecca looked at me steadily. "Then you go to that dinner," she said, "and you smile, and you watch, and you remember every single detail." I nodded. I paid her consultation fee, $350, which I put on my personal card, and I walked out of that building into the June heat, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment with my face turned up toward the sky, and I felt, for the first time in a very long time, like I was moving towards something instead of just enduring it. 3 weeks later, Brandon's parents arrived, and Kayla came with them, and that is when she poured the tea on my head. I need you to understand the sequence of it because it matters. It was a Saturday afternoon, and we were all in the living room, me, Brandon, Linda, Gerald, and Kayla, who had arrived with Linda and Gerald in their rental car, as if she were simply part of the party, as if this were the most natural arrangement in the world. I had made a pitcher of iced tea. I had also made a pot of hot Earl Grey, because Linda preferred hot tea in the afternoons, regardless of the weather. I had set everything out on the coffee table like I was staging a magazine shoot, because I was still performing. I was still, even then, performing the role of the gracious wife, the woman who had everything under control, because I knew, Rebecca had told me, that what I needed to be right now was exactly that. Calm, present, giving nothing away. I had bent down to pick up a coaster that had fallen under the coffee table, and when I straightened up, the cup was already in motion. Kayla had reached across for the teapot, not her cup, the pot itself, and as I came back up, she tipped it. Deliberately. I know she did it deliberately because I saw her eyes in the half-second before it happened, and they were not the eyes of someone having an accident. They were focused and intentional, and satisfied in a way that no accident has ever made anyone look. The tea hit my left temple, my cheekbone, my collar. It was hot enough to make me gasp, a short, involuntary sound that I hated myself for making because it gave her exactly what she wanted. I grabbed the edge of the coffee table. I straightened up. My whole left side was burning. "Oh my God," Kayla said, and her voice had the right amount of alarm in it, the performance pitch perfect. "I am so sorry, I didn't see you there." I turned to look at Brandon. He was sitting in the armchair across from me, and he was looking at me with an expression I can only describe as inconvenienced. Not horrified, not rushing to my side, just inconvenienced. like I was a situation he was going to have to manage. "Clean it up," he said. Not to her, to me. Linda said nothing. Gerald said nothing. Kayla pressed her lips together in a way that might have looked like concern to someone who hadn't seen her eyes 30 seconds earlier. I stood there with Earl Grey dripping off my left ear and running down the collar of the cream-colored blouse I had ironed that morning, and I looked at my husband, and I understood, with a completeness that left no room for doubt or negotiation, that it was over. Not because of the tea, not even because of Kayla, because of those two words, delivered in that tone, to me and not to her. Because of what those two words revealed about which of us he had already chosen, and how long ago that choice had been made. I smiled. I said, "Of course." I walked to the kitchen and I got a dish towel and I came back and I blotted my blouse, and I did not cry and I did not scream and I did not say a single word that would give any of them the satisfaction of knowing that something in me had just broken cleanly in two, and then, in the same moment, begun to harden into something else entirely. That evening, while Brandon walked his parents to their car and Kayla stood in the driveway in the golden hour light saying her goodbyes, I went upstairs. I opened my laptop. I opened the folder called Design Archive 2022, and I added one more entry. The date, the time, and exactly what had happened, word for word, detail by detail, including the look in her eyes before she tipped the pot. Then I texted Rebecca Owens. "I'm ready to move forward. Can we meet this week?" Her reply came within 20 minutes. "Tuesday at 10. I'll have the initial paperwork ready." I closed my laptop. I heard Brandon's footsteps on the stairs. I turned off the desk lamp and sat in the dark for a moment, very still, and I thought, you have no idea what is coming. You have no idea that the woman you just told to clean it up has been building a case against you for 3 weeks. You have no idea that she has an attorney. You have no idea that she has documentation of every florist charge and every River North dinner and every call from KM with her Chicago area code. The door opened. The light came on. "Hey," Brandon said. "You okay? You've been up here a while." "I'm fine," I said, and I turned and looked at him with the calmest face I have ever put on in my life. "Just tired." He nodded. He went to the bathroom. I heard the water running. I picked up my phone and I started making a list of everything I needed to do before Tuesday morning. Tuesday morning came the way all important mornings do, ordinary on the surface, seismic underneath. I woke up at 6, made coffee, fed pretzel, and watched Brandon leave for the office at 7:30 like nothing in the world was different. He kissed me on the cheek. He said he'd be home for dinner. I said okay and smiled, and held the smile until I heard his car back out of the driveway and disappear down the street. Then I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and my list, and I went through every item one more time. I had printed copies of the bank statements, 3 months' worth, the restaurant charges in River North, the florist, the wine boutique, all of it organized by date in a manila folder that I had tucked inside a larger folder labeled Design Client Invoices 2022. I had screenshots saved to a personal cloud account that Brandon didn't know existed, one I'd created on my lunch break 2 weeks earlier using a different email address. I had the private journal, 41 entries, from June 8th through the previous night, time-stamped, detailed, written in the clear and specific language that Danielle had told me to use. The language of someone who knew their words might eventually be read by a judge. I had the entry from Saturday afternoon, the date, the time, the sequence, Kayla's eyes before she tipped the pot, Brandon's exact words. Clean it up. 2 words. I had written them down in quotation marks and underlined them. I drove to Rebecca Owens' office at 9:40. I was 15 minutes early. I sat in the parking lot and breathed. Rebecca had the initial paperwork ready as promised. She walked me through it at a pace that was quick but not rushed, the way a person moves when they respect both your time and your intelligence. Texas Community Property Law. The house, which had appreciated roughly $60,000 since we bought it according to the current market. The joint account. Brandon's 401k, which had grown by approximately $34,000 during the course of our marriage, and was therefore partially subject to division. My own retirement savings, which were modest by comparison because I had been freelancing and had spent the better part of our marriage building a client base rather than maxing out a 401k. Rebecca walked me through the numbers without flinching, which I appreciated. She did not soften them or pad them with reassurance. She just laid them out. "The adultery," she said at one point, and I noticed she said it plainly, without the slight hesitation most people use around that word, "doesn't change the community property division in Texas. It's a no-fault divorce state in terms of asset division. But it does give us grounds that may affect the judge's discretion in certain areas, particularly if we can demonstrate dissipation of marital assets, money spent on the affair." "The florist charge," I said. "Yes," she said. "The restaurant tabs, the wine shop, anything that can be connected to a pattern of expenditure benefiting a third party during the marriage. That's our argument. It's not guaranteed, but it gives us leverage." Leverage. I held on to that word. "When do we file?" I asked. "Whenever you're ready," she said. "But I want to ask you something first, and I want you to think about it honestly. Is there any part of you that wants to try to save this marriage?" I thought about the look on Brandon's face on Saturday, the inconvenience in his eyes, the two words. I thought about Linda in my kitchen with her dish towel and her careful sentences, and Kayla's eyes before the tea left the pot, and the 11 minutes he spent on the phone in the kitchen with the door mostly closed, and the smell I couldn't name when he came home late from Chicago, and 3 years of filing things away and not opening the cabinet and telling myself I was paranoid. I was projecting. I was the problem. "No," I said. "There isn't." Rebecca nodded. "Then we file Thursday," she said. I did not tell Brandon on Tuesday. I did not tell him on Wednesday. I went home both evenings and made dinner and sat across from him at the table and listened to him talk about work. A new distribution hub opening in Indianapolis, a vendor dispute he was managing, the performance review cycle coming up in Q3. I asked follow-up questions. I poured him a second glass of wine on Wednesday night and he said, "Thanks, babe," and smiled at me. And I smiled back and I thought, Thursday. The papers were filed Thursday morning while Brandon was in a meeting. Rebecca's office handled it. By noon, I had confirmation, and by 2 in the afternoon, a process server had delivered the divorce petition to Brandon's office building. Not to him directly, not yet, because he was still in his meeting, but to the front desk with instructions. Brandon called me at 3:47. I was sitting on the back porch watching Pretzel stalk something in the garden bed, and I watched my phone screen light up with his name, and I answered on the second ring. "Melissa." His voice was a register I hadn't heard before, not the patient, managing tone, not the warm one, not the casual one. Something stripped of all of those, raw and slightly out of control. "What is this?" "It's a divorce petition," I said. My voice was so calm it surprised me. "You filed for divorce," he said, and it came out half statement, half question, like he was trying to make the words make sense. "I did," I said. A silence. Then, Why didn't you talk to me? Melissa, if something was wrong, you should have come to me. We could have worked through this. We could have." "Brandon," I said, "I know about Kayla." Another silence, longer this time. Pretzel caught whatever she'd been stalking and sat back on her haunches looking satisfied. "It's not," he started. "I have 3 months of bank statements," I said. "The restaurant in River North, the florist in April, the boutique wine shop on the north side. I have your travel schedule cross-referenced against every charge. I have 41 journal entries documenting what I observed from March through now. I have the text message I saw, the first line of it, which was enough. And I have a sworn account of what happened in our living room on Saturday, including your exact words to me after your former girlfriend poured hot tea on my head." The silence that followed was the longest one yet. I could hear his breathing. "Melissa," he said finally, and his voice had changed again, quieter, flatter, something deflating out of it. "I'm sorry." "I know you are," I said. "You can tell it to Rebecca Owens. She's my attorney. Her information is on the petition." I hung up. I sat on the back porch for another few minutes, and then I went inside and I called Danielle, and when she answered I said, "It's done," and she said, "I'm coming over," and she did. She brought wine and takeout from the Thai place I love, and she sat across from me at my kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten dinners and pretended and watched and waited, and we ate and talked, and she let me cry, finally, the real kind of crying I had been holding back for months. And when I was done, she handed me a napkin and said, "Okay, now we make sure you come out of this hole." I moved out of the house 3 weeks later. It was my choice, Rebecca had advised me I could stay, that vacating the marital home didn't necessarily affect my claim to it, but I could not live in that house anymore. I couldn't sleep in that bedroom. I couldn't sit in that kitchen and look at the warm biscuit walls and feel anything but the specific, exhausting grief of a life that had been real to me and had not been real to him. I found a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex about 8 miles away. Second floor, good light, a balcony where I set up a little table and 2 chairs, and a plant that I was determined not to kill. I took Pretzel. Brandon did not argue about Pretzel. The divorce took 7 months. It was not clean or simple or graceful. It was exactly as complicated and expensive and grinding as divorces are when one person has been hiding a parallel life and the other person has evidence of it. We fought over the house, which eventually sold. We agreed on a sale rather than a buyout because neither of us could manage the mortgage alone without the other's income. And the $60,000 in appreciation was split. We fought over the 401k division. Rebecca was thorough and relentless about the dissipation argument, and while the judge did not rule on it the way we had hoped in terms of a direct financial penalty, it did color the proceedings. Brandon's attorney, a man named Patterson who wore the same gray suit to every hearing, kept trying to reframe the narrative, and Rebecca kept bringing it back to the documents. The bank statements, the cross-referenced travel logs, the 41 journal entries, the documented incident with the tea. That last one, the tea, became strangely one of the most significant pieces of the case. Not because of the physical harm, which had been real but not severe, because of what it revealed. Rebecca argued, and the records supported, that Kayla Merritt had been brought into our marital home by my husband on multiple occasions with his tacit encouragement, that her presence had been normalized and staged, and that the incident on Saturday represented not an accident, but the logical endpoint of a dynamic my husband had constructed and permitted. The judge, a woman named Judge Patricia Hale, with reading glasses not unlike Rebecca's and a quality of attention that made you feel every word you said was being weighed carefully, listened to all of it. She did not say much. She didn't have to. The settlement was not everything I wanted, it never is, but it was fair, and fair was what I needed. I got my share of the house proceeds. I got a portion of the 401k through a QDRO that Rebecca filed the same week as the final decree. I got my maiden name back, Melissa Carr, officially, legally, on every document, on the same afternoon the divorce was finalized, because I had submitted the name change paperwork along with everything else, and Rebecca had made sure it was all processed together. Efficient, clean, done. Brandon and Kayla were together officially by the time the divorce finalized. I heard this from Derek, his brother, who texted me out of nowhere in November to say he was sorry for how things had gone, and that he thought I deserved better. I did not expect that from Derek. I texted back, "Thank you, that means something." And I meant it. Linda never called. Gerald never called. I did not expect them to. Danielle threw me a small dinner when the decree came through, just the two of us, her husband Marcus, and my sister Caitlin, who had driven up from Austin for the weekend. We ate at Danielle's house and drank too much good wine, and Caitlin gave a toast that made me cry and laugh at the same time, which is her particular superpower. I drove home that night with the windows down, even though it was October and cool, and I took the long way around, past the neighborhood where Brandon and I had lived, past the Craftsman with the Greenbelt view. I didn't slow down. I just drove past it at normal speed and kept going. I went full-time freelance in January, 6 months after the divorce was final. The client list I had been building during those long, hollow weeks of watching and waiting turned out to be a real foundation. Real enough, with enough incoming work, that the leap felt less like falling and more like stepping forward. I signed my first major contract in February, a full brand identity package for a regional restaurant group, $28,000, more than I had ever made on a single project. I sat at the little table on my balcony with my laptop and the plant that I had not killed, and I signed the contract digitally, and then I just sat there for a moment with the sun on my face, thinking about all the things I had told myself I couldn't do while I was busy making myself smaller to fit inside someone else's version of a life. I still have the cream-colored blouse. I washed it twice and the stain didn't fully come out. There's a ghost of it on the collar, a faint yellowish ring that you'd only notice if you were looking for it. I kept it anyway. I don't wear it, but I kept it, folded in the back of the closet, Because I think there's something important about keeping the evidence of the thing that finally made you move. Not as a wound, as a record, as proof that you were there, that it happened, and that you chose, eventually, deliberately, completely, to walk away from it. The last time I saw Brandon was at the title company when we signed the closing documents for the house sale. He was with his attorney. I was with Rebecca. We sat across a conference table and signed pages in sequence, and the notary stamped everything. And when it was done, Brandon looked at me. Really looked at me, for maybe the first time in a very long time, and he said quietly, "I'm sorry, Melissa. I really am." I looked back at him. I thought about everything I could say. I thought about the 11 minutes in the kitchen and the Chicago trips and the florist charge and Saturday afternoon and Earl Grey dripping down my collar and 2 words delivered to me like I was the mess that needed cleaning up. "I know," I said. And I picked up my copy of the documents and I walked out. Some people want the last word to be a weapon. I understand that impulse completely. But the most satisfying thing I ever did in that marriage, the thing that I think about now, sitting on my balcony with good coffee and a thriving plant and a cat who kneads my chest every morning and doesn't care who's watching, was simply leaving. Walking out of that title company conference room on a clear October afternoon with my name restored, my share of the proceeds in a wire transfer to my personal account, and absolutely nothing left unsaid that needed to be said. The tea was still in my hair when he looked at me and said, "Clean it up." So I did. I cleaned up everything, just not the way he meant.